On December 8, 2025, a diplomatic standoff emerged when a Nigerian Air Force C-130 transport plane carrying 11 military personnel made an unscheduled landing in Bobo-Dioulasso in Burkina Faso. Now, the Nigerian Air Force maintains that the handling or the landing was a precautionary measure necessitated by a technical concern during a routine ferry mission in Portugal, and insists that the crew is safe. Now, even though the crew has actually been released, according to recent reports, the Alliance of Sahel States, a coalition of military juntas in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, had rejected the explanation, condemning the landing as an unfriendly act and a violation of territorial sovereignty. Now, the AES detained the troops and issued a warning that future unauthorized aircraft will be neutralized, and the detention is widely viewed as a retaliatory escalation linked to events that occurred less than 24 hours earlier when Nigerian forces intervened in neighboring Benin to help foil a coup attempt against President Patrice Talon. But the troops, were later released, as we said earlier. Now, the AES nations, which have severed ties with the Nigerian-led, that's previously Nigerian-led ECOWAS bloc, and realigned with Russia, perceived Nigeria's anti-coup operations as hostile. And this deep geopolitical rift has transformed what Nigeria described as a standard aviation emergency into a volatile flashpoint, underscoring the severe fragmentation between West Africa's democratic governments and the Sahelian military regimes. Now, today we will be joined by Wing Commander Musa Salmanu, retired. He's a security and development expert based in Abuja, Nigeria. Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us, Wing Commander Musa Salmanu. All right, so there's a little bit of a lag.
Good evening, and thank you for having me. Good evening to our viewers.
It's a pleasure. Now, would love to hear your thoughts on, all that has happened, but let's start with the official narrative, and that's that the Nigerian Air Force claims that the C-130 was on a routine ferry mission to Portugal when it suffered a technical fault. Looking at the timing, which was less than 24 hours after Nigerian jets were combat active in neighboring Benin Republic, is this a coincidence or a surveillance mission that went wrong, just as some quarters have suggested?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I'm not holding brief for the Nigerian Air Force, nor am I speaking in official capacity. And I'm going to comment based on what I know as an Air Force or a former Air Force officer and what is in the public domain. Having said that, it is normal that aircraft do undergo several levels of checks or that's repairs. From time to time, aircraft components have those components that are time-bound or those that are that have to be changed that they have because they have spent certain number of time, or they have to be changed because they have gone certain number of hours of operation. Now, putting this in context, you find out that these operations are likely to be completely different. What I mean by the intervention in Benin and the ferrying of the aircraft perhaps completely different operations that were undertaken for different reasons. Now, the aircraft or the C-130, the Nigerian Air Force has certain capabilities to repair the aircraft up to to ensure the serviceability of this aircraft up to a certain level. Now, they didn't go to details to tell us what type of check is it or what type of repairs, but it is normal for this aircraft to be ferried, the word ferry very important here, to other facilities that have higher capacity for checks or for repairs. It's just like your vehicle, if we're going to use layman terms, it's your vehicle that is being taken to the mechanic. Sometimes the repairs are minor and therefore can be done at home, but some of these repairs have to be gone or have to be taken to a specialist. So basically that is what happens when aircraft are being ferried. And based on the release from the Nigerian Air Force, this aircraft was due for such checks and is being ferried to Portugal for such repairs. Now, it's just like your aircraft, your car also. If a car is already having issues, the possibility or the likelihood that it could develop further issues along the way are very high. So based on that, this is likely what happened.
Okay. Now, Commander, the AES did not just ground the plane. You know, they issued a communique, signed by Colonel Assimi Goita, calling it an unfriendly act carried out in defiance of international law. Now, that is language usually reserved for enemies and not neighbors. So does this confirm that, the AES now views Nigeria not as a regional partner, but as a hostile belligerent?
So, unlike civilian aircraft, military aircraft have different modus or means of operation entirely, because military aircraft have some status and they can be used for offensive action. Now, this aircraft in particular is not an armed aircraft, though it can be used for such purposes, but this particular one is not. And the routine or the normal practice is that such for bypass or so let's start with every state or every country has the sovereignty over its own airspace. So for you or for a military aircraft to pass through that airspace, there must be clearance, diplomatic clearance that gives the aircraft the go-ahead to pass through that airspace. And when that is not done, it can actually be seen as a kind of an offensive action. It can be seen as being something that has to be explained to that country why its own airspace is violated. So if you look at the issues, the AES is speaking from that fact that its airspace is violated, and it owes or it requires explanation from Nigeria. And since it's a military aircraft, it views it as a hostile intent, with hostile intent. However, when such thing happened, you have to first look at what actually happened. The Air Force explains that there was an emergency, so that has to be checked if there was an emergency. And once an emergency is declared, there are normal standards or there are expected protocols that could be done. Yes, the aircraft is not intended to land there, but which is the closest aerodrome to it? That could be the closest place that aircraft could land. In that, it will request for permission to land, and the Burkina Faso has 2 or 3 options. The first option is to give the accelerated or emergency clearance for that aircraft to land. The second one is to say, okay, we don't agree, or we're going to escort you to a safe or a particular military base where you're going to land. And the third is for it to refuse completely, to say that we don't agree for you to land in our land or in our country or our territory. Now, it's very unlikely that the third will happen because of the issues of, especially if emergency is declared. Now, having the aircraft landed, whether because it was given the go-ahead and escorted, or it was not, or just go ahead to land, there are follow-ups that both countries have to take. One is, for example, what the AES is doing to communicate to Nigeria that this is what the aircraft is doing, and to demand explanation or even apology from Nigeria for violating its airspace. So they are normal things, especially if it's been proven that that aircraft is not on a military mission. Like it said, or Nigeria said, this is a ferry operation, taking this aircraft for maintenance.
All right, now, you've actually answered a few of my questions, but then the AES statement warns that they have authorized their forces to neutralize any aircraft that violates, their space in future. And we're talking about, Russian-backed air defense systems now active in the Sahel. So how close are we, or even were we, to a shoot-down scenario that could, trigger a full-scale regional war?
So it's common practice that and that's why every nation has the right to defend its airspace. Like I mentioned earlier on, every nation has the right over its own airspace. So now, when you have in situation of hostilities, when there's an incursion into your airspace by an enemy aircraft, you have the right to demand, to ask, to identify. There's what is called the identify friend or foe, the IFF, for that aircraft, or the response will determine whether you engage the enemy aircraft or you allow it to land or force it to land or chase it out of your airspace. Now, for them to say that they have authorized for any aircraft to be engaged, they are within their right to say that. However, I think in practice, except there are declared hostilities between the two countries or between AES and Nigeria, the downing of Nigerian aircraft that for operational reasons or one reason or the other goes into the airspace is very unlikely to happen. However, it doesn't mean that they don't have the right to act accordingly. And this action could be forcing the aircraft to land, and also if the aircraft refuses to go off their airspace, engaging that aircraft. And if the aircraft encroaches into the airspace, there are also protocols to file complaints against such actions. The last, of course, is to engage that aircraft. But in this situation, where there is no declared hostilities, there are several steps that could be taken, and the last of it is to engage the aircraft with the attempt of bringing it down.
All right, Commander Salmanu, let's pivot to Benin Republic. That's Benin. Where on Sunday Nigerian airstrikes helped crush a coup attempt against President Patrice Talon. Now, this is Nigeria's first foreign military intervention in a decade by unilaterally saving Talon. Would you say that President Tinubu has confirmed the AES's worst fear, and that Nigeria is now the policeman for Western-aligned democracies in the region?
Well, so we have to look at Nigeria's action within several contexts. The first being that there is the ECOWAS protocol on democracy and good governance, and so many other protocols which Nigeria is a party to, and which, and by that, Nigeria has certain duties and responsibilities to act. Now, based on what is available to us, we know that, or it has been stated that the legitimate leadership or the legitimate government in Benin requested for Nigeria's intervention on two occasions. One through airspace, and secondly through even operation with the Beninois, both on air and in the ground. Now, the legitimate government, every country or every nation, there are three basic things. Every nation, for example, has a responsibility to protect its citizens, to ensure good governance and so on. Then, using all the resources that it has, the international community or nations also have a responsibility to assist countries that are willing to do that or that are struggling to do that but do not have the capacity to do that, especially when there are these calls. And then, of course, the last one, which is when countries are not have the capacity but are not willing to ensure this protection. Now, having looked at what is available to us, we know that there was the invitation by the Beninois government, and the ECOWAS also has a framework which allows for intervention to preserve democracy amongst ECOWAS countries. Yeah. Now, if you put all this side by side, you find out that Nigeria perhaps will have been acting, one, on that invitation, two, on good neighborliness, and three, on the issue of the fact that both ECOWAS and EU have clearly stated that coups are not welcome and every action could be taken to ensure the preservance of democracy within the continent.
All right. Now, speaking of preserving, democracy within the continent, so many critics are pointing out to a double standard, saying that the ECOWAS had threatened force in Niger, but never used it. Yet, we see in Benin that, which is a country vital to Nigeria's economy, jets were scrambled in hours. So, in your personal opinion, would you say this intervention was about preserving democracy, or it's simply about securing the Lagos-Cotonou trade corridor, because we know how important that corridor is for Nigeria?
You have to, in examining the various situations, whether it's in Burkina Faso, it's in Mali, or in Niger, you have to look at the context. You have to look at the timing at that time. All those interventions took time. They were a call of. If you look at the sequences, when those interventions or when those coups happened in those three countries, there was the issue of ECOWAS engaging in diplomacy, ECOWAS engaging in negotiations, and so on and so forth. Perhaps it has reached a stage that ECOWAS has seen that negotiations and so on do not work, because in those three occasions, none of the negotiations and diplomacy worked. That could be a reason why perhaps ECOWAS in this situation immediately allowed for this. Then secondly, there is also the posture that is adopted by Nigeria itself in terms of neighborliness. With benefit of hindsight, we could have, for example, intervened earlier if we knew that the disturbance or the stability in our neighboring countries could affect us in the way it is affecting us, whether because of the crisis in Chad then that brought about small arms and light weapons coming into Nigeria that facilitated Boko Haram, or also the routes through Niger where the bandits in the northwest are having some of their supplies. With benefit of hindsight, you will say that if your neighbor is having a problem, it is in your own best interest to ensure that you work with that neighbor to ensure that it is curtailed, because this type of intervention costs less. They nip the problem in the bud. Now, talking particularly about this, let's not forget that the legitimate government requested for this assistance. This is very key. This is very important. That means that Nigeria was responding in terms of that request that was made by that government. You can't rule out the fact that Benin and Nigeria, there's a very important trade route. And you can't rule out the fact that states have their own national interests that they pursue. So if you combine all those facts, you find out that it was in Nigeria's best interest to respond to its neighbors' call for assistance before it gets out of hand.
Absolutely agree with you on that. Now, Commander, we also know that the coup plotters in Benin, tried to seize the presidential palace in Cotonou, and we know you have your ears to the ground. And reports actually suggest that some conspirators, may have had links to elements in the Sahel itself. So, is there any credible evidence that the Benin coup was a proxy attempt by the AES to encircle Nigeria with hostile military regimes?
Well, I don't have any facts regarding that, but why you see when coups start happening around, there are copycats. There are people that get motivated. It's like every crime. When people do and get away with it, it encourages others. When there are no repercussions, when people can get away with it, and they knew perhaps the protocol or the ECOWAS will condemn it, AU will condemn it, Then they will say we urge that there should be revert to democratic order and so on and so on. And the negotiations, the diplomacy starts and so on and so forth. Perhaps that is what they thought coming from Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali. But so it was important for ECOWAS to show that the ECOWAS has a teeth to bite, that there are provisions for that and this is unacceptable. So this could be encouraged, even if not directly linked to AES, but it could be encouraged by the success that those in AES had. And that prompted them to also try to exert the coup. But the very robust reaction by ECOWAS through Nigeria means that ECOWAS is sending that message that never again should the undemocratic supplanting or the undemocratic change of government will be accepted within the ECOWAS sub-region. So it's a clear signal, it's a clear message to will-be coup plotters that this is no longer acceptable.
All right. Well, Commander, would love to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll definitely continue this discussion. Do stay with us. Thank you for staying with us on the conversation. We're still talking about the attempted coup in Benin Republic, and we still have Wing Commander Musa Salmanu, retired, a security and development expert in Abuja, speaking to us. Thank you so much for staying with us, Commander. Now, let's talk about, the president of Benin, whom has been facing declining popularity and accusations of autocracy. By using Nigerian military might, to keep him in power. Is Nigeria backing a leader who, according to some opposition figures, is just as authoritarian as the juntas that Nigeria opposes?
So, the issue with democracy is that there are two sides to the same coin. There's the issue of periodic elections where every particular time, whether 4 years, 5 years, or 7 years, there are periodic elections and people put themselves up for election. Then there is the other part, which is democracy in action, which is to what extent do the Democrats actually ensure that there are dividends of democracy, what we call the dividends of democracy, or in simple terms, good governance. Now, if you put those two side by side, and they should actually go side by side, because periodic elections alone do not ensure democracy. Democrats have a responsibility to ensure that democracy presents its dividends to the citizens. Democracy is all about the welfare and the well-being of the citizenry. And unfortunately, in West Africa, or generally, we're seeing a situation whereby Democrats actually accept the part of regular election, periodic election, with all the shortcomings that thereof, but do not actually want to implement the second leg of democracy, which is to ensure that there is good governance and the citizenry could feel that democracy is worthwhile. Having said that, Nigeria's intervention in Benin should be seen beyond the president of Benin. It should be seen beyond an individual or trying to sustain an individual within the presidency or in government. It should be seen that voters or the citizen have the chance to change government whenever that periodic or that time that is allotted for election comes. Now, no matter how bad it is, we have to work on the fact that this can be improved upon. If this is, and this is where leadership, and this is where ECOWAS also has to rein on its own member countries, that it's not all about elections, even though ECOWAS has all protocols that ensure that there will be good elections. It has rolled out all these protocols that ensure you can't change some of the major things just prior to elections. You can't elongate your tenure while in power and so on. But we've seen instances where this is observed and breached, and you will perhaps accuse ECOWAS of not acting decisively when leaders are doing that. Even though in the past we have seen that where ECOWAS have insisted for leaders to hand over when they have lost election. But ECOWAS should go more in that to ensure that we don't reach that stage, and ensure that when leaders come on board through democratic means, that they implement the second leg of democracy, which is to ensure good governance and to ensure that those agitations are reduced to the barest minimum.
Well, you speak as though you still have faith in ECOWAS, because diplomacy seems to be failing. You know, you have the AES, you know, withdrawing from the bloc. You know, they've also expelled French troops, and they're courting Russia as of now. So if Nigeria cannot even retrieve a stranded aircraft without a standoff, is ECOWAS effectively dead as a security mechanism?
So let me correct the fact that maybe if we say a standard standoff in that aircraft, I think it's just yes, there was this stance or the strong show by AES that there was incursion in their airspace and so on. Those are normal, what I call them, rhetorics and so on. But you can see within 2-3 days that aircraft was released, and you do not hear that there was any because there was no hostile intent. There was nothing to show that this has failed. Now back on ECOWAS, yes, the issue of Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, with benefit of hindsight, could have been treated better. However, having said that, the ECOWAS or diplomacy is a slow, painful, and sometimes effort or resource engulfing process. It's easy to break ties, but it's so difficult to mend those ties and ensure that people come back together. Peoples of West Africa have known that despite its shortcomings, despite its inefficiency in certain assets, ECOWAS to a large extent has ensured that the West Africa sub-region has improved on the standard of living of its citizens and has brought certain standards that are enviable and are even in fact copied by other sub-regional organizations. So to a large extent, I have confidence in ECOWAS. I have confidence in ECOWAS' capacity to mediate, to through diplomacy, bring back its members back to its fold. Don't forget, these leaders being non-democratic, and ECOWAS has a zero tolerance to non-democratic leadership, could be doing all this to also save their face, or as a means of survival strategy. I foresee that with time, these relationships will be mended, and lessons learned will be applied in a way that when we are faced with certain situations, like we were faced with in Benin, that ECOWAS will act in a way that ensures that the region or the sub-region continues to go strong and to go together as one sub-region.
Well, let's hope it is as you have said. Commander Salmanu, let's have your final thoughts before we wrap up.
So, well, for me, the truth is that we cannot legislate, nor can we, with military force, or should we attempt through military force to force democracy. Democracy is something that should be visible. People should feel it. People should know that through democracy that they are active participants and they are stakeholders in their own destiny and in their futures. Leaders must have a duty, or leaders have a duty and a responsibility to ensure that democracy works for all, that democracy does not work for few, that democracy does not exclude the majority. So the only way we can stem this tide is to ensure that good governance is delivered, democracy works for the majority of the people of the West Africa sub-region.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Wing Commander Musa Isa Salmanu, retired security and development expert in Abuja, Nigeria. We really appreciate you for your insightful and expert thoughts on this conversation.